After helping an elderly woman who had fallen in a restaurant, a waiter was fired. Shortly after, a waiter comes to the aid of an elderly woman who collapses in the restaurant, only to face public humiliation when the manager fires him on the spot. But the unexpected happens when a mysterious customer steps forward, delivering a revelation so shocking it leaves him stunned. The La Sombra restaurant was as elegant as ever, filled with low murmurings and the soft clinking of silverware on porcelain. Warm, dim lighting created an intimate atmosphere, and well-dressed patrons enjoy the exclusivity of one of the city's finest establishments. Eduardo, a 26-year-old waiter, moved efficiently yet discreetly between tables. It was another busy night, but he was accustomed to the fast-paced rhythm of his sophisticated workplace. Balancing a tray laden with steaming dishes, Eduardo maintained the polite smile expected of him. But in an instant, everything changed. A sudden crash of breaking dishes echoed through the room, silencing the crowd. All eyes turned to the source of the noise. An elderly woman, her face pale, hands trembling, had collapsed in the center of the restaurant. The towering seafood platter, sheep and balancing, now lay scattered around her, her frail body surrounded by fragments of the luxurious meal. Without a second thought, Eduardo placed his tray on the nearest table and rushed to her side, dropping to his knees on the cold floor. The patrons watched, some horrified, others annoyed by the disturbance. Eduardo instantly sensed something was wrong. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice laced with concern as he touched her arm. The woman tried to respond, but only a faint, broken sound escaped her dry lips. Her wide eyes were filled with panic as she struggled for breath, her chest emitting a desperate wheeze. "She's having an asthma attack," Eduardo realized, recalling the first aid training he'd taken last summer. Once serene, the restaurant now teetered on the edge of chaos. Nervous whispers filled the air, and Eduardo felt the judgmental stares of those around him. "Just breathe with me, ma'am. Slowly in through your nose, out through your mouth." He exaggerated his own breaths so she could follow along. The woman, he would later learn her name was Antonia, tried to mirror his breathing, but her wheezing only grew louder. Eduardo knew he needed to act fast. Just then Raul, the manager, appeared, his face a mask of irritation. He didn't spare a glance for the woman or Eduardo, focused only on one thing. "What's going on here, Eduardo?" Raul asked stiffly. "Why is this woman on the floor?" "She's having an asthma attack, Mr. Raul. I'm trying to help her, but we need to call an ambulance," Eduardo replied. Raul scowled, casting a wary look at the customers. He seemed far more concerned with the restaurant's image than with Antonia's condition. "Get this woman out of here. Take her to the office, out of sight. This is disturbing the other customers." Still kneeling beside Antonia, Eduardo looked up in disbelief. "We can't move her. It could make her condition worse. She needs to stay still until the ambulance arrives." Raul crossed his arms, unimpressed. "I don't care, Eduardo. That's an order." Eduardo took a deep breath, fighting to stay calm, but frustration simmered inside him. Raul didn't care about Antonia's health, only about La Sombra's polished reputation. But for Eduardo, the woman's safety was what mattered. The woman coughed weakly, pulling his attention back to her. Eduardo held her gently, soothing her with a calm voice. Then, looking up at Raul, he said firmly, "With all due respect, Mr. Raul, I'm not moving her. She needs help, and I'm staying until she's stable." Raul's face darkened with anger, but before he could retort, the distant wail of an ambulance siren filled the air. Eduardo felt a brief moment of relief, knowing help was near. Yet the warning in Raul's eyes made it clear there would be consequences. The ambulance was still blocks away, but inside La Sombra, chaos was already unfolding. What was once a serene, elegant dining experience had devolved into tense murmurs and worried glances. Eduardo continued kneeling beside Antonia, guiding her through deep breaths. Around them, patrons watched with disdain as if her presence was a blemish on the restaurant's pristine atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," said Francois, the maitre d', his voice shaking as he tried to sound firm. "The situation is under control." But the anxious looks on the patrons' faces told a different story. A woman in a designer dress rose from her seat, glancing around with disgust. "This is unacceptable," she announced, her eyes fixed on Francois. This place was a haven of class, and now look. Others began to murmur in agreement, with some even standing to get a better look. The tension was rising fast, and Eduardo felt control slipping through his fingers. Just then, Raul stormed out of his office, pushing open the door with a force that echoed across the room. His face was flushed with anger as he strode toward Eduardo and the fallen woman. "What's going on here?" he barked, glaring down at Eduardo. "Why is this woman on the floor?" Focused on helping Antonia, Eduardo barely glanced at him. "She's having an asthma attack, Mr. Raul. I've already called for an ambulance," he replied, gently guiding the woman's breathing. Raul shot a look at the shocked diners around them, clenching his teeth. What seemed to anger him most was the scene disrupting La Sombra's impeccable image. "Get this woman out of here, Eduardo," Raul demanded, his voice ice-cold. "Take her to the back office. Now." Eduardo looked up, incredulous. Moving Antonia could worsen her condition. She was still struggling to breathe, and he needed to keep her calm. "Mr. Raul, she can't be moved," he replied. "She needs air and stability. Moving her now could put her at serious risk." Raul's eyes narrowed, fury flashing across his face. "I don't care, Eduardo. You're here to serve customers, not play doctor. Get this woman off the floor, or there will be consequences." The heavy silence that followed was thick with tension. The patrons watched, captivated, anticipating an even greater scene. Eduardo, however, had made his choice. He looked at Antonia, who was breathing shallowly, and held his ground. "With all due respect, Mr. Raul, I'm not moving her. She needs medical help, and I'm going to make sure she gets it," Eduardo said, his voice unwavering, even if it meant risking his job. Raul's face reddened further, a vein throbbing at his temple. He looked ready to explode when, finally, the sirens grew louder just outside the door. Eduardo felt a rush of relief, though he knew this conflict was far from over. The paramedics rushed in, carrying medical bags. Eduardo quickly waved them over and explained the situation. They worked with practiced efficiency, placing an oxygen mask on Antonia's face until her breathing steadied. As they prepared to move her, Raul leaned close to Eduardo, his voice a low growl. "Once this is over, we'll have a talk in my office, and it won't be pleasant." Eduardo simply nodded. He knew Raul wouldn't let this go, but at that moment, all that mattered was that Antonia was safe. As the paramedics lifted Antonia onto a stretcher and prepared to take her to the hospital, a collective sigh of relief swept the restaurant. The patrons gradually returned to their tables, still whispering and casting uneasy glances. Raul stood nearby, watching silently, his expression stern. Eduardo stayed with the paramedics until the last moment, ensuring Antonia was stable. When the ambulance pulled away, he lingered at the door, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. La Sombra began to settle back into its routine, the customers, though still rattled, slowly resuming their meals. Murmurs continued, but now, the focus had shifted from Antonia to the young waiter who had defied his manager's command. Eduardo knew what lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face Raul, who waited with a grim look. Arms crossed, the manager gestured to the office. "Eduardo, my office, now," Raul said, leaving no room for objections. Eduardo glanced around the dining room. Some colleagues watched him with concern, while others avoided his eyes, too fearful to get involved. He gave a brief nod to Maria, the waitress who had always supported him, and slowly walked toward the office. As he entered the small room, decorated with luxurious furniture and meticulously arranged books, Raul slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the space. Eduardo held his ground, staying as calm as he could, though he knew this wouldn't be easy. "Sit down," Raul ordered, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. Eduardo hesitated, then took a seat, clasping his hands in his lap as he waited for the manager's words. Raul walked slowly around his desk and sat, his eyes locked on Eduardo, a controlled anger simmering just below the surface. "What do you think you're doing, Eduardo?" Raul began, his voice low and laced with irritation. "I gave you a clear order to get that woman out of the dining room, and you defied me in front of all the customers." Eduardo straightened his back, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Raul, with all due respect, that woman's life was at risk. Moving her could have worsened her condition. I only did what was right." Raul scoffed, slamming his hand on the desk and rattling the papers. "What's right?" he retorted, his face reddening. "What's right here, Eduardo, is that you jeopardized this restaurant's reputation. La Sombra is known for its exclusivity and impeccable atmosphere. We can't allow scenes like that in the middle of our dining room." Eduardo stared, stunned at what he was hearing. "Are you saying that a person's life is worth less than the image of this place?" he asked, struggling to believe the conversation. Raul shook his head impatiently. "Don't be naive, Eduardo. Of course, that woman's life matters, but you should have handled it differently. Call an ambulance discreetly, take her out through the back." He crossed his arms, his irritation growing. "Instead, look where we are, customers leaving, complaining. You caused a spectacle." Eduardo felt anger rising within him, but worked to stay in control. He knew he was on dangerous ground. "With all due respect, sir, she wasn't a spectacle. She was a person in need, and I acted as any decent person would," Eduardo replied, his words steady and resolute. "I couldn't have risked her life just to keep the customers comfortable." Raul narrowed his eyes, clearly offended. He leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk. "We're not talking about morality here, Eduardo. We're talking about how you disobeyed a direct order and disrupted the restaurant's operation." His voice grew sharper, each word filled with disapproval. "Because of that, you're fired, effective immediately." The words hit Eduardo like a blow to the chest. Even though he had expected this outcome, hearing it still felt devastating. He sat quietly for a moment, processing Raul's decision. Memories of the long shifts, the hard work, the plans he had to support his family and pursue his studies, all of it flashed through his mind, but he didn't allow sadness or fear to take over. Instead, he rose slowly, maintaining his composure, and looked Raul in the eye. "If that's how it is, Mr. Raul, I accept it," Eduardo said, taking a deep breath. "But know this, even fired, I don't regret what I did, and I'd do it all again if I had to." Raul seemed caught off guard by Eduardo's calm resolve. He had expected anger or submission, but not this kind of quiet defiance. The manager simply shook his head in disapproval. "Then gather your things and leave. You're dismissed immediately." Eduardo nodded. He knew this moment would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated the impact it would have on his life. He left Raul's office without looking back, feeling the watchful eyes of his colleagues on him as he crossed the dining room. Maria, who had been watching from a distance, hurried over as he stepped out. "Eduardo," she said softly, concern in her voice. "Did he fire you?" Eduardo forced a smile, trying to keep his spirits up. "Yes, Maria, he fired me, but it's all right. I did what I had to do." Maria squeezed his hand tightly. "You did the right thing, Eduardo. We all know that." He gave her a grateful smile, but he knew nothing could change the fact that his future in that place was over. He was now facing a new chapter, with no idea what might lie ahead. With the weight of his dismissal heavy on his shoulders, Eduardo walked through the familiar restaurant, feeling the silence from his coworkers intensify the moment. Each step toward the exit felt like a blend of frustration and acceptance. He knew he'd made the right choice, but the reality of losing his income was starting to sink in. Maria, the waitress who had always stood by him, was the first to approach. "Eduardo," she whispered, careful not to draw Raul's attention from the office. "What did he say? What happened?" Eduardo mustered a weary smile. "He fired me, Maria. Honestly, I knew this was coming," Eduardo said, shrugging as though the weight of it all didn't sting. "I did what I had to do. No regrets." Maria's face softened with compassion as she placed a comforting hand on his arm, though she knew it wasn't enough. "This is unfair. You were only trying to help that woman. I can't believe Raul did this to you." Eduardo gave a short, bitter laugh. "Raul cares more about the restaurant's reputation than people, Maria. I knew that already, and I still chose to do what I thought was right." A few other colleagues came over, offering whispers of support and knowing looks. Eduardo thanked each of them, feeling both gratitude and sadness. La Sombra had been his place for years, but now it was time to move on. He gathered his belongings from the locker room, slung his bag over his shoulder, and took one last look around the restaurant. The place that had once felt like a second home now seemed cold and distant. At the exit, he glanced back one last time. Raul was still in the office, and life inside La Sombra continued as if nothing had changed. With a heavy sigh, Eduardo opened the door and stepped out. The night air was cold, and the wind stung his skin as he walked down the street. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the sound of passing cars and people was a stark contrast to the silence he felt within. He had no plan, but he knew he couldn't look back. La Sombra was behind him now. As he walked, Eduardo's mind spun with thoughts. He remembered the scene earlier that night. Antonia collapsed on the floor, and his choice to help her defying Raul. He wondered if it had all been worth it. He knew he had done the right thing, yet the reality of losing his job still stung. Then, as if on cue, a familiar voice called out from across the street. "Eduardo, wait." Eduardo turned and, to his surprise, saw Samuel, Antonia's husband, who had witnessed the whole ordeal. Samuel crossed the street quickly, his face a blend of concern and determination. "Eduardo, give me a minute," Samuel said, slightly out of breath. "I need to talk to you." Eduardo stopped, surprised yet curious. He wasn't sure what to expect, but Samuel's presence brought a faint sense of hope. "Of course, sir," he replied, trying to mask the exhaustion in his voice. "I saw what happened in the restaurant tonight, how you handled everything. I was honestly impressed," Samuel began, meeting Eduardo's gaze directly. "Few people would have had the courage to do what you did, especially knowing it could cost them their job." Eduardo sighed, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would have done, sir. That woman needed help, and I couldn't ignore her." Samuel smiled, though his expression turned serious. "Many would have ignored her, Eduardo. Many would have followed Raul's orders, even knowing it was wrong. But you didn't, and that's why I'm here now." Eduardo frowned, puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Samuel looked off into the distance as if collecting his thoughts, then turned back. "My wife and I aren't just ordinary customers. We have a project, something that connects directly to what happened at La Sombra today." He paused, observing Eduardo's reaction. "We work with people who find themselves in difficult situations, people who need help and often have no one else." Eduardo stayed quiet, taking in Samuel's words. This was unexpected, yet something about it sparked his curiosity. "What do you mean, sir?" he asked. Samuel's eyes brightened as he smiled. "I want you to be part of it, Eduardo. We need people like you, people with principles and compassion who do the right thing, even when it costs them. I know you've just lost your job, but maybe this could be a new beginning." Eduardo was speechless, processing the offer. The opportunity seemed almost unreal, but he sensed Samuel's sincerity. I don't know what to say, sir. This is unexpected," he admitted, still in shock. "I understand." Samuel chuckled softly. "I'm not expecting an answer now. Just think it over." He handed Eduardo a card. We can meet tomorrow if you'd like. I can tell you more about what we do and how you can help." Eduardo took the card, feeling the weight of his next decision. "Thank you, sir. I'll think about it." "Take your time, Eduardo. Remember, sometimes doors close so better ones can open," Samuel said, reaching out his hand. Eduardo shook it, watching as Samuel crossed back to the other side of the street. Left alone, he looked down at the card in his hand, feeling a small spark of hope, even amid the confusion of the night. Maybe this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, the one he truly needed. With a sigh, he slipped the card into his pocket and started home, a new sense of possibility growing inside him. That night, Eduardo lay awake, tossing and turning as he fiddled with the card, feeling its edges as if they held the answer to his questions. Samuel's offer felt almost surreal, like fate had suddenly stepped in, offering him something beyond what he thought he could have. But excitement came with a twinge of fear. The unknown was daunting, and he wasn't sure he was ready for the responsibility it might bring. As the first light of dawn filtered through his window, Eduardo rose, exhausted but full of restless thoughts. He needed a clearer mind to make this decision. After a quick coffee, he made his way to a nearby park. The calm of the trees and distant birdsong provided a moment of peace. Sitting on a bench beneath a large fig tree, Eduardo finally allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Looking toward the horizon, he replayed Samuel's words in his mind. "We need people like you, with principles and compassion." He'd never thought of himself that way. But something about the way Samuel spoke to him, as though he could truly make a difference, stirred a spark inside him he couldn't ignore. Still, doubt crept in. I ready for this asterisk, he wondered again and again. His job at La Sombra, though modest, had been a safe haven. He knew the work, the customers, and how to keep his pride, even under raw scrutiny. But stepping into a new role in such a grand, unfamiliar project felt like a leap he hadn't prepared for. Eduardo thought about his family. They depended on him. He couldn't risk letting them down. But he also knew that staying at La Sombra would only keep him where he was. Samuel's offer could be a chance to grow, not just for himself, but to help others caught in difficult circumstances, just as he'd been. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Samuel. "Eduardo, I hope you're doing well. I don't want to rush you, but if you're available, I'd be happy to meet this afternoon. Let me know if you can come." He read the message several times, thinking it over. If he met with Samuel, he'd be opening the door to something completely new. Slowly, Eduardo stood up from the bench, took a deep breath, and replied, "I'll be there at 2 p.m. Thank you for the opportunity." Relief and nerves surged as he hit send. He'd taken the first step. There was no turning back. Time flew as the afternoon approached, and by 1:30 p.m., Eduardo was already on the bus heading to the address Samuel had sent. Arriving at the sleek, modern building, Eduardo's heart raced. He entered the elegant lobby, where a receptionist led him to an elevator. Everything felt polished and impressive, so different from his routine at La Sombra. The elevator doors opened on the 12th floor to a spacious room filled with natural light streaming through large windows, offering a view of the bustling city below. Samuel was sitting in a leather chair, flipping through papers. He stood up as Eduardo entered, greeting him with a warm smile. "Eduardo, I'm glad you're here. Please, have a seat," Samuel said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. Eduardo returned the smile, nervous but determined to stay composed. "Thank you, sir. I wanted to hear more about your offer," he said as he settled into the chair. Samuel nodded, pleased. "Of course, I imagine you're curious about what we do and why I believe you'd be a valuable addition to our work," Samuel began, his voice calm and welcoming. Eduardo listened intently, eager to understand the full scope of the opportunity. "My wife, Antonia, and I run a foundation that supports people in vulnerable situations," Samuel explained. We work with individuals who, for various reasons, find themselves marginalized by society. Our focus is on reintegrating them, providing support, and creating new opportunities. Many of these people have faced extreme hardships, poverty, abandonment, discrimination. Eduardo nodded, intrigued. "And how do I fit in?" he asked, trying to imagine how his experience might serve something so impactful. Samuel's face lit up. "You've already shown that you have exactly what we need, Eduardo. At the restaurant, you displayed compassion and integrity, even when it could have cost you everything. That's what we're looking for. We need people who can handle real human situations and genuinely connect with those in need." Eduardo absorbed Samuel's words, letting them sink in. He hadn't realized his actions could have such significance. "So, you want me to work directly with people who need help?" he asked, still a bit hesitant. "Exactly," Samuel replied, his tone encouraging. "We want you to be part of our team, a bridge between these individuals and the opportunities we can provide. Someone who understands the value of compassion and human dignity." Eduardo fell silent, deep in thought. It was an incredible offer, but it also posed a significant challenge. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this, sir," he finally admitted, looking at Samuel. "I've never done anything like this before." Samuel smiled, his understanding evident. "No one is born knowing how to do it, Eduardo. But I see your potential, and from what I've observed, you're already on the right track. Think of this as a new chapter in your life, something that could change not just your future, but also the future of many others." The weight of Samuel's words settled heavily on Eduardo, yet he also felt an unexpected sense of purpose. "You don't have to decide right now," Samuel continued. "Take your time to think it over. When you're ready, the door will always be open." Eduardo nodded, and with a firm handshake, he said goodbye to Samuel. As he stepped out of the building, his mind raced with thoughts. Samuel's words echoed in his head. A new chapter in your life. Something that could change not just your future, but the future of many others. It all felt so grand, almost surreal. He found himself questioning, am I really ready for this? Walking through the bustling city streets, doubts clouded his mind. He had always lived a simple life, adhering to a predictable routine and tackling the daily challenges without any grand aspirations. The job at La Sombra, though draining, provided him with stability, which he relied on to support himself and help his family. But now he was facing the unknown, and this new path came with an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Needing to clear his mind, Eduardo sought a quiet place to reflect. He crossed the neighborhood square and noticed a small, cozy cafe. He stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and settled by the window. Cradling the warm cup, he finally found a moment to organize his thoughts. What am I truly searching for? He pondered. The answer didn't come right away, but he recognized one truth. The job at La Sombra wasn't the end of his journey. A longing for something more, a greater purpose, stirred within him. Samuel's offer seemed like the key to that, yet he couldn't shake the void of uncertainty that held him back from fully embracing the opportunity. As he sipped his coffee, he thought of his family. He knew they were proud of him, particularly his mother, who had always urged him to live with integrity and to do what was right, regardless of the situation. He imagined how she would respond to the news of his firing. She might worry, but Eduardo felt certain she would support him if he chose to follow the new path Samuel had laid before him. Days flew by, and although Eduardo hadn't reached a final decision, he sensed that with each hour, he was leaning closer to accepting the offer. Perhaps the fear of the unknown was actually a sign of impending growth and transformation. Then, one evening, as he sat at his dining table with his phone in hand, he mustered his courage. He dialed Samuel's number, anxiously listening as the phone rang. "Samuel Correa speaking," came the familiar, cordial voice. "Hello, Mr. Samuel. "This is Eduardo," he began, his tone steady despite the racing of his heart. "I've given a lot of thought to your offer, and I've decided to accept. I want to be part of your project." There was a brief silence on the other end, but then Samuel's voice burst with enthusiasm. "Eduardo, that's fantastic news. I'm so thrilled to hear that. I knew you would make the right choice." He sounded genuinely excited. "We can start discussing how you'll fit into our team as early as tomorrow." Eduardo smiled, feeling a wave of relief and excitement wash over him. "Great, I'll be there tomorrow," he replied, finally sensing that he had made the right decision. The next morning, Eduardo arrived at Samuel's office, filled with renewed purpose. When the elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, Samuel greeted him with a broad smile. "Eduardo, welcome officially to the team," Samuel said, shaking his hand firmly. "We have a lot of work ahead, but I believe you'll play a vital role in everything we're building." Though still a bit nervous, Eduardo felt reassured by Samuel's warm welcome. He knew that from this moment on, his life was taking the new direction. They entered the meeting room, where Antonia, Samuel's wife, was already waiting with several documents spread out on the table. "Eduardo, it's great to see you again," Antonia said, her gentle smile putting him at ease. "Samuel has shared so much about you. I'm so glad you decided to join us." Eduardo expressed his gratitude, feeling a sense of belonging. They spent the morning discussing the project details. Samuel and Antonia explained how their foundation operated, offering support to individuals in vulnerable situations, providing training and facilitating social reintegration through partnerships with various companies. They worked with the homeless, refugees, and even former inmates, giving a second chance to those who needed it most, who had been marginalized by society. Eduardo's role would involve working directly with these individuals, serving as a bridge between them and the opportunities provided by the foundation. His responsibilities would include visiting them, understanding their stories and struggles, and finding practical solutions to improve their lives. "You'll be our link to the realities on the streets," Eduardo, Antonia explained, detailing the role further. "We need someone who's not afraid to confront the truth and can manage the complexities of each case." Though the responsibility felt overwhelming, Eduardo gained confidence with every word. He recognized that it wouldn't be easy, but he also understood this was his chance to engage in meaningful work, something that genuinely mattered. "I'm ready," Eduardo declared firmly. "I may not know everything, but I'm eager to learn and give it my best." Samuel nodded in approval. "That's exactly what we need, someone with the heart and determination to do what's right. We'll start slowly to help you adapt, but I believe you'll soon become an integral part of what we're building here." The afternoon flew by, and Eduardo left the office feeling lighter. He had finally discovered something that resonated with him. While fear still lingered, it was now eclipsed by the excitement of being able to make a real difference. He wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but he felt ready to embrace it with courage. The next morning, Eduardo woke up with a blend of nerves and excitement. This would be his first official day at Samuel and Antonia's foundation, and he knew the responsibilities would be challenging. Yet something within him urged him onward, determined to create change. He dressed simply yet professionally and left home earlier than usual. The route to Samuel's office was becoming familiar, and each visit made the modern, inviting atmosphere of the foundation feel increasingly welcoming. When he arrived, Antonia greeted him with a stack of neatly organized papers laid out on the meeting room table. "Good morning, Eduardo. Are you ready to begin?" she asked with a warm smile. "Yes, I'm ready, Antonia," he replied, trying to mask his nervousness. Antonia chuckled, shaking her head. "No need for ma'am, just call me Antonia. Here we're all equals, working toward a common good." She pulled out a chair and sat beside him, spreading the papers across the table. "Today, I want to share some stories about the people we serve. I know it might feel overwhelming at first, but these stories illustrate how life can dramatically change with a simple act of support and understanding. Eduardo picked up the first file. It detailed the story of a woman named Solange, who lost everything after a work accident. Lacking support and resources, she ended up on the streets. He read about her struggles, despair, and how the foundation intervened, giving her a second chance of reintegration into society. Solange now works at one of our partner companies. It's been a long journey for her, but you can see the profound impact that timely help can have, Antonia said, observing Eduardo closely. It's incredible, he replied, struck by how a shift in perspective and support could transform a life. And this is just one of many stories. You'll hear many more like this, Antonia continued. Starting today, you'll be part of this. We'll take it slow, but I want you to begin following some of our clients to understand their needs. They need to feel that they can trust you. Eduardo nodded, aware of the seriousness of the task at hand. Being a bridge between these individuals and the opportunities the foundation provided was not a responsibility he took lightly. He understood that each person carried emotional baggage filled with challenges and scars, and he needed to be prepared to approach this with empathy and care. Today, you'll accompany me to one of the community centers where some of our clients are participating in reintegration programs. I want you to meet Diego, Antonia said as she gathered the papers. He's one of our recent cases. He has a lot of potential, but he's still grappling with trust issues. Accepting help has been difficult for him, and you may notice he has some reservations. Eduardo listened intently, absorbing every detail. Diego seemed like the kind of person who would need time to build trust, and Eduardo recognized that patience and sensitivity would be essential. Shortly after, they left the office and drove to the community center, situated in a less privileged area of the city. The place was simple yet well-maintained, and as they arrived, Eduardo felt the profound impact that this environment had on the lives of those who frequented it. Upon entering, they were welcomed by the center's coordinator, who guided them to where Diego was seated. Diego, a man of about 35, wore a closed expression as he sat at a table in the corner, engrossed in an old newspaper, barely glancing up when Antonia and Eduardo approached. Diego, good to see you, Antonia said, attempting to break the ice. This is Eduardo. He just started working with us, and he'll be accompanying you over the next few days. Diego offered a brief glance at Eduardo, but his body language remained guarded. He didn't respond right away, prompting Eduardo to realize he needed to tread carefully. Hi, Diego. Nice to meet you, Eduardo said, extending his hand in a friendly manner. Diego looked at the outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it quickly, lacking enthusiasm. Nice to meet you, he replied, returning his attention to the newspaper. Antonia observed the interaction in silence, allowing Eduardo to navigate the situation on his own. Eduardo understood that forcing a conversation or trying to get too close too quickly wouldn't work. He needed to earn Diego's trust gradually. I know you must be used to people coming here offering help, Eduardo began, his voice calm and gentle. I want to understand how we can approach this in a way that works best for you. Diego turned his gaze sideways, as if measuring Eduardo's sincerity. You won't understand what I've been through just by looking at me, he said, a hint of challenge in his tone. Eduardo nodded in acceptance. You're right. I can't understand just by looking, but I can listen if you want to share. He maintained a friendly yet direct tone, knowing that Diego was not accustomed to trusting anyone. Diego shrugged, but Eduardo noticed a flicker of curiosity in his posture. There was something about Diego that kept him from fully opening up, yet Eduardo sensed that with time, he could build a connection. The first interaction wasn't a major breakthrough, but Eduardo understood it would be a slow process. As he left the community center later that day, he felt more aware of the challenges ahead. There was much work to be done, but he was determined to persevere. On the way back to the office, Antonia smiled at him. You handled Diego well. He doesn't trust anyone easily, so don't get discouraged. It'll take time, but you've already taken the first step. Eduardo returned her smile, feeling a small wave of relief. Thank you, Antonia. I know it'll be a process, but I'm willing to keep moving forward. And that's exactly what we need, she replied. The most important thing is not to give up. Every small victory counts, even if it seems insignificant at first. In the days that followed, Eduardo returned to the community center, consistently working to earn Diego's trust. Each visit was a small step toward encouraging him to open up, though progress was slow. Diego still maintained his emotional distance, which was understandable given his past, but Eduardo remained steadfast. On one sunny morning, Eduardo arrived at the community center, which was buzzing with various activities. He spotted Diego in his usual corner, flipping through an old book. Approaching calmly, Eduardo sat in the chair next to him, choosing to remain silent for a moment. Sometimes, silence could convey presence without pressure. After a few minutes, Diego broke the silence without looking up from the book. You're persistent, aren't you? Eduardo smiled softly, recognizing this as Diego's way of acknowledging him. I'm not here to bother you, Diego. I'm here to listen whenever you're ready to talk. Diego snapped the book shut and set it aside, finally looking directly at Eduardo. Listen, huh? Everyone always claims they want to listen, but nobody ever really does anything. Eduardo leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. I understand what you're saying. It must be frustrating to feel like people make promises but never follow through. But I'm here to try something different. I don't have all the answers, and I can't change your past, but I can help you shape your future. Diego remained silent, his gaze locked on Eduardo, as if weighing whether to trust him. Do you even have any idea what it's like to be on the street? Diego asked suddenly, his voice low but filled with restrained emotion. To fight every day just to survive, and still have people look at you like you're invisible? Eduardo felt the weight of the question. He knew he couldn't fully comprehend the experience of living on the streets, but he could imagine what it meant to lose everything and be treated as if you didn't matter. No, Diego, I don't know what it's like, but I can imagine how hard it must be, and that's why I want to help you find a way out, if you'll let me. Diego slowly shook his head, as if grappling with the desire to open up. He took a deep breath, and Eduardo could see the conflict within him, wanting to trust but held back by the scars of his past. Help, huh? Diego repeated, his tone less skeptical than before. Everyone talks about helping, but the truth is that help usually comes with a price, and I've paid too many prices already. Eduardo nodded, recognizing the pain in Diego's words. He knew that earning the trust of someone who had endured so much would require patience. I'm not going to promise you anything I can't deliver, Diego, but I can guarantee that I'm not here to ask anything of you. I just want you to have a chance to start over, but that can only happen if you believe it's possible. Diego stared at him, his expression a blend of distrust and curiosity. It was a look Eduardo recognized well, a reflection of someone who had been let down too many times, yet still held a flicker of hope. After a lengthy pause, Diego let out a sigh. Okay, Eduardo, let's see where this goes, he said, his tone lacking enthusiasm but hinting at a willingness to try. For Eduardo, those words represented a small yet significant breakthrough. He understood that the journey ahead would be challenging, but this moment marked the beginning of what he hoped would evolve into a trusting relationship. In the weeks that followed, Eduardo made it a point to visit the community center regularly, keeping in close contact with Diego. Gradually, Diego began to open up about his life. He recounted how he had once been a regular worker with a family and a stable existence, until a workplace accident left him temporarily disabled. Lacking resources and overwhelmed by mounting bills, his wife left, and he ultimately lost his home. The absence of support, combined with physical and emotional turmoil, forced him onto the streets where he had spent the last 2 years. Eduardo listened intently to every detail, refraining from interrupting. He recognized that Diego needed the space to express his feelings and unload the burdens of his suffering. As Diego shared his story, Eduardo understood the significance of not only hearing these narratives, but truly connecting with them. After one of these conversations, he felt it was time to make a proposal. "Diego, I know you've endured a lot, and I'm not here to pressure you, but the foundation can help you find a new job, something that aligns with your skills and current situation. You don't have to decide immediately, but I'd like you to think about it. It's an opportunity to start anew." Diego frowned, clearly skeptical. "A job? You think anyone would hire me? Just look at me." He gestured to his worn clothes, and the lines of hardship etched on his face. "Who would want to employ someone like me?" Eduardo understood Diego's doubts. Years on the streets had eroded his self-esteem, but he also saw a chance for Diego to rebuild it. "Trust me, Diego. We work with companies that offer opportunities to individuals who want to make a fresh start. It won't be easy, but it is possible, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Diego looked at him in silence for a moment, as if weighing the proposal for the first time. He recognized the risk of trusting again, but he also understood that continuing to live on the streets held no future for him. "I'll think about it," he finally replied. While his response was vague, Eduardo sensed that progress had been made. The subsequent days marked a new chapter in Eduardo and Diego's relationship. The barriers that had once separated them began to dissolve, and gradually, Diego started to place his trust in Eduardo. Although their journey had only just begun, Eduardo realized that every small step forward was a victory. On a bright Wednesday morning, Eduardo arrived at the community center as usual, but noticed something different about Diego. He sat in his usual corner, but his posture was more upright, and there was a spark in his eyes that suggested change. Eduardo approached him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Diego. How's everything going?" Diego looked at Eduardo, and after a moment's hesitation, he said something unexpected. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." His voice was firmer than usual. "About the chance to start over. I still don't know if I'm ready, but I can't keep living like this. I need to try something different." A wave of satisfaction washed over Eduardo as he heard those words. He knew Diego had battled his own doubts and fears to arrive at this conclusion, which was a monumental step for someone who had lost so much. "I'm glad you've given it some thought, Diego," Eduardo replied with calm encouragement. "You don't have to tackle everything at once. We'll take it step by step. What matters is that you're open to trying." Diego nodded, though he still looked anxious about returning to work. Having been out of the system for so long, the idea of re-entering a formal environment felt daunting. Eduardo could sense the weight of that anxiety, but he was prepared to support Diego through every phase of the process. "I think I could start with something small," Diego said thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I can handle a full-time job right now, but maybe part-time could work." Eduardo smiled, pleased with Diego's willingness to consider options. He knew the foundation offered a range of opportunities and had many partner companies eager to hire individuals in social rehabilitation, even if it meant reduced hours or less demanding roles. "To start, we can focus on that, Diego," Eduardo replied, maintaining a calm demeanor. "I'll discuss it with Antonia and Samuel, and I'm confident we can find something suitable for you. We'll move at your pace, no rush." Diego appeared relieved by Eduardo's approach. He didn't want to feel pressured, and Eduardo recognized that patience was essential to prevent Diego from retreating. Later that day, Eduardo returned to the foundation's office to talk to Samuel and Antonia about Diego's options. They listened attentively as Eduardo explained the situation and proposed a part-time position at one of their partner companies. "That sounds excellent," Samuel said with an approving smile. We can reach out to one of our partners in recycling. They often need help on the production line, and it's a low-stress environment, perfect for someone making a fresh start. Antonia, who was also present, concurred. And the best part is that the company is already familiar with our reintegration programs. They're patient and have worked with other cases similar to Diego's. This could be a fantastic opportunity for him, she added, clearly pleased with Eduardo's efforts. Eduardo felt a surge of gratitude for being surrounded by people who believed in the potential of those marginalized by society. He understood that securing a job was just the first step, but it was one of the most critical. Diego needed this chance to begin rebuilding his self-esteem and regain a sense of worth. The next day, Eduardo returned to the community center to meet with Diego and share the good news. "Diego, I found something that I think will be perfect for you," Eduardo said as he sat beside him. "It's at a recycling company, part-time, and they're ready to provide all the support you need to feel comfortable." Diego looked surprised, but a spark of curiosity shone in his eyes. "Recycling, huh?" he said, as if mulling over the idea. "I never thought I'd work in that field, but it sounds like something I could do. It's a good start." "Diego," Eduardo encouraged, "you'll learn gradually, and more importantly, you'll begin to feel like you're part of something again." Diego paused for a moment, contemplating the words, and finally took a deep breath. "All right, I'll give it a try," he said. A wave of satisfaction washed over Eduardo. Diego's acceptance of this opportunity confirmed that his efforts at the foundation were making a real difference. More importantly, it demonstrated that with the right support, people could rewrite their stories, even after enduring the darkest of times. On Diego's first day of work, Eduardo made a point to accompany him to the recycling company. It was a small gesture, but he understood how important it was for Diego to have someone present at the start of something new. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the manager, a middle-aged man with a warm and welcoming demeanor. "Diego," the manager said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "We're thrilled to have you here. We'll start off slowly, and remember, if you need anything, we're here for you." Diego thanked him timidly, still feeling uncertain, but Eduardo could see the determination in his eyes to give it his best shot. After a brief introduction and overview of the tasks, Eduardo said his goodbyes, leaving Diego in the capable hands of the manager. As he walked back, Eduardo couldn't help but smile, knowing this was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of something much larger for Diego. That afternoon, Eduardo returned to the foundation's office and found Antonia and Samuel already there. "So, how did it go?" Samuel asked, eager to hear about Diego's first day. "He accepted," Eduardo replied, beaming with satisfaction. "Today was his first day, and I believe he's going to do well. This is just the beginning, but it's a significant step." Antonia and Samuel exchanged pleased glances. "Excellent work, Eduardo. You've truly made a difference in Diego's life," Antonia said, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Keep it up, and before long, we'll have many more success stories like this." Eduardo felt the weight of Antonia's words lift his spirits. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Helping Diego find his path was just the start of his mission. Many others like Diego were waiting for someone to believe in them. As the day came to a close, a sense of fulfillment washed over Eduardo. He was aware that the work in the neighborhood was far from complete. Many more people needed help, and numerous challenges lay ahead. But he was ready for them. He wasn't alone anymore. The community stood with him, and together they could continue changing lives. That evening, as Eduardo walked home, he gazed up at the starry sky, feeling the gentle night breeze on his face. He reflected on everything he had overcome to reach this point, every difficulty and every triumph. For the first time in a long while, he felt as if he was exactly where he was meant to be. With a satisfied smile, Eduardo knew he was prepared for whatever lay ahead. In the end, he had discovered that real change begins with small acts of kindness and an unwavering belief in people. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with your friends. Don't miss the next video coming up on the screen. I'm sure you're going to love it.